Hey everyone, this is Lori Ricciardoni, and you are listening to A Taste for All Seasons. This is a cooking, a cultural, and inspirational way for us to explore the world of food with the philosophy of eating with the seasons and why this is really beneficial. I am passionate about food. I love teaching seasonal cooking. I love getting people excited about eating with the seasons. And it's summer right now. There are so many beautiful ingredients that you can cook with that I wait all year for. Recipes that I only really get to make this time of the year. Sure, I could get a tomato and make a tomato tart in the winter or cooler months, or get corn in later times and make corn fritters. But I will argue that they absolutely do not taste like a tomato that is picked at its peak. And I'm also going to talk about how I utilize my summer ingredients. You are listening to WPVM LP 103.7 FM in Asheville, North Carolina. Welcome. As we continue our journey through food with that philosophy of eating seasonally, the ingredient we're going to focus on today is basil, basilico. And I'm going to share the many ways that I utilize this vibrant herb that takes time to grow. I can smell the basil right now in my kitchen. I actually just made a pesto the other day, which I'm going to share with you today. We're going to explore the meaning of slow food. And really, it's a way of eating and it's a way of living. And it strives to prevent the disappearance of local food cultures and traditions. It makes me think of my grandmother and my father, who was a Northern Italian chef, and all the dishes that they started teaching me how to cook at the age of 10 that were in our family for so many years. And I continue to use those same techniques and methods, although I am a gluten-free chef and these dishes were filled with gluten, but the techniques, the method, the love that went into it, all of that really remains the same. And I'd also like to talk about why we would benefit from this simple way of living. I think that it creates balance in our lives with the rise of fast-paced life that we all live, and to inspire myself and people around me to create further interest in the food that we eat. I believe that how we eat is how we live. And you know, this way of eating is really about a commitment to quality instead of a commitment to speed. And it promotes eating local and preserving the original techniques that were used to create regional dishes that focused on healthy, nourishing food over speed and convenience. An example of this is a simple salad made from vegetables grown in your own garden, or if that's not a possibility, a weekly visit to the farmer's market. So many ways to get our food that's grown closer to home. And as always, I will share a recipe with you, which is a mouth-watering pesto. And I'm going to walk you through how to make it with the original technique of using a mortar and pestle, in honor of moving more slowly in our lives. And for those of you not familiar with a mortar and pestle, it's a set of two simple tools to prepare ingredients by crushing and grinding them. And typically it's made up of marble or some form of stone. More about that later. I'm also going to talk about how the slow food movement came about, the why, the what, and the mission of eating and living in this way. So if you are a curious cook and eater, you will want to stick around. So go get a cup of tea or coffee, get cozy, and join me on this delicious journey through food. Before I walk you through that delicious recipe, which is pesto today, I want you to give you some background information. I'm going to touch on the history of slow food. It's a global grassroots movement, really, that prevents the disappearance of local food cultures and traditions, which are so important. It has three main goals. There's taste education, sustainability through biodiversity, and interaction between food producers, farmers, and the community. We're going to start with taste education. It was in 1986, Italian journalist Carlo Patrini recognized that a proposed McDonald's restaurant in the Piazza di Spagna near the legendary Spanish Steps in Rome represented a threat to the Italian food culture of the trattorias and the osterias. So what Patrini did is he rallied all his activist friends to defend the regional traditions, which are good food, gastronomic pleasure, and a slow pace of life, which Italy has really always been known for. That movement in time for Carlo Patrini sparked the creation of the official slow food movement. I remember my first experience to Rome, and I was sitting on those gorgeous Spanish steps and seeing the McDonald's next door. It didn't shout out at you like it does in other places. The architecture was a little bit more understated, but nonetheless, it was McDonald's. And I just thought, what a dichotomy. Ancient Rome and McDonald's just didn't seem to go together. I'm going to bring us back into the States to a very cool lady and a chef that is one of my favorites, and that's Alice Waters. She's the founder and chef of the legendary Chez Panisse restaurant in Berkeley, California. Also, arguably, she pioneered farm to table. I believe it was 1971 when she opened the restaurant, and as the story goes, she opened it for her friends to have a place to gather and talk about the politics of the day and eat seasonal, good home cooking. And she started developing relationships with the farmers in the surrounding area. And that was the food that was on her menu. And she would always list whether it was peaches or the lamb you were eating or, other produce. She always listed the farmers. So it really gave you a connection to where your food was coming from. And there was one menu. It was 3 courses. I remember the first time I had the pleasure of eating there, and it was just that one menu. This is what was being served, and it was an open kitchen, and you got to interact with the chef if you so choose, and it was just an incredible experience, one that I still remember. And Alice Waters started the Edible Food Project, bringing awareness of where our food comes from to the public schools, which is pretty cool. And they found that the kids that grew their own food, tended to their vegetable garden, their community garden, harvested it, they cooked it, and of course ate it. But they found that they had a much greater appreciation for the food because they really had an understanding of where our food comes from. And that continues to this day, the Edible Food Project. So I think it's just a wonderful opportunity to, have your children maybe grow a few little things and have a little bit more of an understanding of where their food comes from. They might be more open to checking it out. It makes me think of my own taste education and when that begun. And it makes me think of my dad, who was a Northern Italian chef. I'm sure I've mentioned that before. And when he wasn't working, he used to take my sister and I to restaurants in New York a lot. And, all the local incredible food purveyors there and just beautiful ingredients, he would suggest, probably more insist, that we try certain dishes. And I remember some ravioli being put in front of me that had chanterelle mushrooms with it. And I thought, okay, these are a pretty color, but I don't know, they look kind of strange. And really, when I think about all of those dishes that I started eating at that age, that was really what started to develop the palate that I have today. So I think it's just a beautiful thing to gently nudge your children, because our palates are very different when we're young, to try some new ingredients and just to be open to them. Then we have sustainability through biodiversity. Really, biodiversity is the basis of agriculture and the food that we grow. And diversity in plants, what that does is it gives us a treasure chest of options for raising healthy food and really, productive crops. And a key ingredient in creating a sustainable food system, if you will, is the biodiversity and crop rotation and, keeping that soil healthy so that, generations to come, healthy soils, healthy, delicious food. And also it makes me think about how farmers really incorporate patience, and the slow ripening is a key component in growing delicious ingredients. It makes me think about basil, which is our main ingredient today, and how farmers really understand the slow food movement, if you will, because it takes about 35 days to grow basil. You really do have to have some patience. So hats off to farmers that really have to wait, which I would think is super, super satisfying for their crops to yield, those beautiful plants and foods that we all come to love and rely on. Then, of course, there's the farmer, food, and community. The first farmers market in the United States opened in 1634 in Boston. I thought that was pretty interesting. But as I said earlier, it wasn't really until the 1970s when America became health conscious and that farmers markets began to make an appearance again. It wasn't so long ago. I could remember in the 60s growing up that the extended family, often living under the same roof, they grew a lot of their own veggies and some fruit. Their backyard veggie gardens were the norm, not the exception. And makes me think of the food truck, kind of a farmer's market on wheels, if you will, that used to come around my grandmother's. This was in the 60s, is my first memory of it, really, where, string beans and spinach and a lot of different produce. They had the old scale on the truck, and, you would get whatever you didn't grow in your yard, you would get from the farmer's market on wheels. So I think that is pretty cool as well. And just it was a fond memory for me. I enjoy knowing the history behind a dish, its origins, where it came from. I mentioned the original technique and tradition of using mortar and pestles for making pesto. Did you know that they date back to 1550 BC? And it was actually estimated that mortar and pestles were used for 6,000 years before this for food preparation, mostly for grinding spices, but also they were used to make cosmetics for women in Egypt. And the beautiful benefit of this is the aromatic perfume that permeates through your kitchen when you take the time to pound out the oils from spices. It's kind of a primal experience. So if you're looking for more depth of flavor in the dishes that you make, whole spices will advance flavor and aroma in a dish. Absolutely. We're talking about the famous pesto alla genovese, and the name alone recalls not only its origin, but also its preparation. It's a pesto, as its making process includes pestare, to pound, to crush, all the ingredients in a mortar and pestle. And as the story goes, it made its first appearance in the city of Genoa. And this sauce, pesto, as I just said, originates in Genoa, which is in the Liguria region of northern Italy. And from the time the Italians invented pesto, it has mainly been prepared the same way, which is with crushed garlic, basil, pignole nuts, European pine nuts, blended with extra virgin olive oil. And then you mix in your Parmesan Reggiano cheese and Pecorino Romano, which is a cheese made from sheep's milk. And don't confuse Parmesan, I think is how they say it, with Parmigiano Reggiano. It does not have the same intense umami flavor, and it doesn't have the right texture, especially those lovely crunchy crystals that can only come with age. And it takes a minimum of 12 months to age Parmigiano and up to 36 months to get the certification. And each from the 12 months, then 24 months, if I did a cheese tasting in Parma when I was there, and they were really, really different. And the only thing that really changes that is time. We'll talk about time as an ingredient. I was just transported back in time to my visit in Parma, which of course is the home of the king of all cheeses, Parmigiano Reggiano. And we were driving around Italy. We were taking a little road trip with a big chunk of Parmesan cheese. It was the best Parmesan Reggiano I ever ate. I didn't really know before that what it tasted like. And it was just an incredible experience, really, that I never forgot. This is a complete aside, but I think it's worth sharing, particularly for those listening that are fast movers like myself. I was making a birthday cake for a client, and I thought, why not take a photo for your Instagram page? You know, I'm an entrepreneur. I do a lot of different things in my business along with cooking. So I was setting up my camera with a tripod on top of my island. So it was pretty high up there, climbing on a ladder. I had a stool behind me, and I was moving too quickly. I wasn't following slow food, and I fell off the ladder over my stool and I broke my arm. And I talk about life telling me to slow down. So I just thought I would share that for those of you that are fast movers and maybe learn from my kind of traumatic experience. And that has really had me slow down in a way that I never had before. And I do continue to move quickly in some ways because I'm just wired that way. But anyway, that was a little aside. That's my story. So before we start the recipe, I wanted to take a little bit more, a moment to actually speak to the benefits of taking more time and attention in the food that you're making, and why we would benefit from this very simple philosophy and way of not only eating but also living. Because how we eat is how we live, I believe. And how can we incorporate this philosophy into living a more flavorful life in addition to perhaps a less stressful life? So we're making this pesto with a mortar and pestle in honor of taking our time in the kitchen, which takes close to 15 minutes. And I just want to say that there is no doubt that we have benefited from convenience like a food processor versus a mortar and pestle. But I would argue from my own experience that making a pesto slowly, intentionally, with that mortar and pestle, rather than pouring all the ingredients into that convenient food processor, which has a metal blade touch the tender leaves of basil, it is noticeably different in flavor and texture. It's so much more mild, and actually more of each ingredient comes through when I make it this way. And this technique will encourage you to take your time to move more slowly in the kitchen. It has for me. So it brings me to that other ingredient that I talked about, which is time. And we don't think of time as an ingredient, but it is indeed. It makes me think of Chef Thomas Keller, which I heard him say that anyone can learn how to cook, and I agree with that. It takes patience, practice, and time. Like anything else, we have to practice it. Just time is the essential ingredient in mastering anything. So we have to slow down a little bit. It is time to make our pesto. I'm excited about this, to share this recipe with you. So we're using the old school method, the original technique, which is with the mortar and pestle, a wooden one, because marble would be a little bit too heavy and a bit aggressive against the basil. This recipe is for two. You know, if you have a big enough container, the mortar, you can just double it and do it that way. But if I'm going to make it for, more than two people, I would just double the recipe that I'm giving you today. So first we're going to clean our basil leaves, about 20 to 25 large leaves. If they're smaller leaves, add some more basil leaves. You're going to tear them into pieces. And then meanwhile, take the skin off the garlic. I like everything just being ready to go. So have your cheese weighed out and your pine nuts, and I'll tell you how much of everything. You don't want any one of the ingredients to be overpowering. You want the basil, the pine nuts. With the pesto, there's few ingredients, so you really want that balance. You want them all to come through. Some people will use more garlic, and you can. You can certainly make it your own, but again, I like to balance all the ingredients. So using that wooden pestle, you're going to crush the garlic with a little pinch of coarse salt. And what that will do is it'll break down the garlic and it'll help make it into a smooth paste. Now you're ready for your pine nuts, pignoli nuts. You're going to crush them again a bit. The paste should be really smooth before moving on to the next step. So this will take a few minutes. It'll take a little bit of time. And if it's your first time making it, just be patient with yourself. Then we're going to gradually add the basil leaves. And rather than crushing them, we're going to move the pestle gently, kind of rotating it against the sides of the mortar until it forms a puree with the basil. And you'll add them as you go along. You'll see that they'll just start to kind of break down and they'll start to release that delicious scent from Genovese basil that I love so much. This will take about 10 minutes. So again, time is one of our ingredients here. Then we're ready for our extra virgin olive oil. Drop by drop to begin with, so the pesto is compact but not runny. We'll be using about a half a cup of olive oil. You really have to use your judgment on the oil because you don't want it too runny. And it's a matter of taste for some people. They might like it with a little bit more oil in it. Some might like it a little on the thicker side. And on the cheese as well, we're going to be adding about a half a cup of the Parmesan Reggiano, maybe 3/4. Keep it there for yourself. About quarter cup on the Pecorino Romano. You want the Parmesan to be a little bit more abundant than the Pecorino Romano. And Pecorino, even though they both have a salty element, the Pecorino is a little bit sharper, if you will. So you want to use a little less of the Pecorino cheese. Then when you feel like your oil is kind of mixed in and you have that puree, then you're going to add your cheese to the mixture. Fold it in, give it a nice mix, taste it for seasoning. And if you feel like you want a little more salty element to it, I would add a bit more cheese, not salt. And you might want to add a little bit more cheese anyway, so just taste it as you go along. That's what cooking is, tasting as we go along. Then you're done with your pesto. If you're going to use it right away, fold it into your favorite pasta and a little chunk of some great bread with a nice crust, little side salad, and dinner is served. I'll talk about some other ways to use pesto. There are so many ways that we might not think about. So I'll give you those little inspirational tips in a little bit. If you're not using the pesto right away, lay a piece of cling wrap on top of it to prevent any discoloration, oxidation. That's really important. Then put it into a tight jar or container, and you can store it into the fridge for about 3 days. I've actually even done it a little bit longer. So I have checked this out to make sure that it still, tastes delicious. I think we all know that making something, right away, there's exceptions to that rule. Something fresh like a pesto is best served right away, but it really is fine if you're going to use it, a couple of days later. Okay, the full recipe is on my website, lauriorchidoni.com, along with many delicious gluten-free seasonal recipes for every meal and mood. There's also quite a few vegan and grain-free recipes as well. And also, the station's website, WPVMFM.org, has a food section under Culture that offers not only this recipe, but a plethora of delicious seasonal gluten-free inspiration. Also, I feature a monthly article and a seasonal recipe every month in Sophia Magazine right here in Asheville. And it also offers a digital copy on their website each month. So I was talking about those little inspirational tips, and also as we utilize seasonal ingredients, such as basil, arugula is another wonderful herb, lettuce, whatever you want to call it. Adding some lemon zest, maybe some walnuts, you can make a really beautiful pesto with arugula as well. And just, play around with it. Add garlic, don't add garlic, really just kind of have fun with it. And then, there's those traditional summer picnics that usually have potato salad, macaroni salad. Pesto is incredible folded into both of those. And, room temperature, they could be chilled. Sometimes macaroni salad is served chilled. Just gives it a nice little Italian kick to it. And I find it really delicious. And so I would definitely give that a try. It's also really great on roasted vegetables. There's so many vegetables right now that are at the market. It's wonderful folded into an omelet. You could lay it on top of a pizza. I have a cauliflower crust pizza that I'll spread the pesto on, maybe some fresh summer tomatoes when they're in season, a little bit more shaved Parmesan. Delicious. It's also great for soups. Might be a little bit more in the cooler weathers. I mix it into my minestrone soup, and it really does take it to another level. So I would also suggest that. Kitchen essentials, what you're going to need for making this is a food processor, if you're going to roll that way, the mortar and wooden pestle, a microplane, or a box grater for the cheese. I always like to go over the health benefits of ingredients that we're using, and basil's an excellent source of vitamin K and vitamin A, C. Also, there's calcium and magnesium and omega-3 fatty acids, actually, which all support a healthy immune system. Did you know that basil actually isn't simply for internal use? When basil's oils are extracted to make an essential oil, it's wonderful and very healing for treating cuts and wounds and just skin infections. You do want to add a carrier oil to it. I would research that a little bit. And if you are interested in truly natural products, you might want to check out my holistic skin and hair care line, which is lrmodernalchemy.com. There's also a link on my Lori Ricciardoni website under Meet Lori, and I'll just spell it out for you. I don't know if I did that earlier. It's LaurieRichardone.com. Join me on Saturday, July 31st at 11 a.m. on WPVM LP 103.7 FM in Asheville, North Carolina. And as we continue our expedition of seasonal cooking, we're going to be talking to the farmer and owner at Green Toe Ground Farming about how his passion for his ancestral Italian foodways translate in how he farms, eats, and lives life. So I am really looking forward to that conversation. I'd like to extend a sincere thank you to all you listeners who have taken the time to join me today, and as always, to Davine Dial, who makes this show possible. So thank you. I'd like to leave you with a final thought, food for thought. What would our life and community look like if we slowed down? I realize some of the things I talk about are easy to do and some are not so easy. And I think perhaps the hardest thing to do is to change our attitude and our mindset. We have to rethink our priorities and rethink the way we approach life and all things in it, like cooking our food. So start with something simple, like a pesto, and try making it in that slow way. And if at first it doesn't turn out the way you would have liked it to, you can try again tomorrow. Buon appetito!